have unfinished business with the Federation.
Oh no, not again.
We return to the world of Blake 7, that BBC science fiction show put together on a shoestring in a 2-for-1 bargain bin that's also 50% off.
What?
Today we'll look at each episode of Blake 7.
Take a long look. That's the last you'll ever see of it.
No, I'm coming back.
So yes, we have looked at Blake 7 before, the BBC science fiction drama that ran between 1978 and 1981. But Blake 7 is, for reasons that I can't fully articulate, one of my personal favourite programs of all time. So today we're going to quickly look at each of the series' 52 episodes. For a full look at Blake 7, who made it, how it was made, etc., have a look at our review. This video will assume that you've either seen the series in full or that video, and so there will be spoilers. Yes, a spoiler warning for a show that's several decades old. Lots of people will discover a show they've never seen before years after the original run. That, and there was the amnesia after the plane crash in the jungle. You remember that, don't you?
There is nothing else like it in the universe.
Blake 7's 4 seasons or series are generally known by a letter, so the first season is Series A through to Season 4 being Series D. Just to confuse the matter, we'll probably use both ways of describing each year of the series.
Let's get started.
Blake 7's creator, Terry Nation, had elected to write all 13 episodes for Series A. Nation was a writer that could do really outstanding work, insightful, with wit and verve, when he wanted to, or was inspired. And then there were the other times.
That is astonishing.
Now, Terry Nation was no hack, but when pressed for time or lacking an inspiration, he could string together familiar action-adventure standards, cliches and tropes like nobody else. In describing the first series of Blake 7, we'll see both sides of Terry Nation's writing. The Way Back is pretty much the most atypical episode of Blake 7, but does a pretty good job of setting up the backstory of the main character and, just as importantly, what sort of society Earth is in the far future. Spoilers, it's not good. And not in a mustard on pizza type of not good, but in a mustard on pizza crime against humanity. Rog Blake is a model citizen who is manipulated into breaking several laws by these two. Look, names are not important, so you might as well call them Joan Easy Target and John not appearing in the second act for some strange reason. Leaving the city is a crime, so is attending a meeting of activists opposed to the Earth Federation's brutal style of government. Blake's been told about his past. He was an opposition leader who'd been captured, brainwashed into denouncing his followers, and then brainwashed again. Like somebody who's holding the map upside down during a pub crawl and rather than getting roaring drunk, instead accidentally joins 5 different cults in one evening. Blake doesn't believe any of this, but twigs something, just something, might possibly be up when everyone else in the meeting is brutally murdered. He's captured again, but the authorities are in a quandary. The optics on killing Blake would just reinforce the view that he was coerced into cooperating in the first place, and so they send him to trial on child molestation charges.
All involving children.
Kids in the 70s were a tough lot who could handle anything in their family programs, since apparently back in the day, according to the comments, most 12-year-olds were already on 3 packs a day of Marlboro and working as mercenaries in South America smuggling mustard destined for Pizza Hut. Blake's attorney uncovers evidence of a conspiracy just in time for his attorney and his missus to, well, anyway. The episode's low budget is as obvious as the nose on your face after you've walked into a glass door. But it does effectively set the scene for a series that in no way resembles this episode. You might as well have watched Three's Company if you wanted any idea of what Blake 7, the series, would end up being.
From there you will be transported to the penal colony on the planet Cygnus Alpha, where you will remain for the rest of your natural life. Spacefall
was the first episode filmed, and it's a purely studio-bound production. It details most of the 8-month journey to a prison planet on an austere prison transport that is marginally preferable to 2 weeks on a cruise ship with backed-up septic tanks during a dysentery outbreak.
You have no rights whatsoever.
Blake makes some new friends. Well, it's easy since most of the prisoners seem to be film and television extras apparently arrested for trying to get some lines in Poldark. Gentle giant Gan is big and intimidating, while Avon is cynical, belligerent, and just not interested in Blake's small talk. Then there's this guy apparently named Nova, who could be part of Blake's gang, except he misses his chance when he decides to relive the 90s club scene with a foam party.
What a fiasco. You could take over the ship, you said, if I did my bit. Well, I did my bit, and what happened?
Anyway, Blake's first attempt to take over the ship fizzles out, but all the while the ship has been feeling shockwaves from a space battle before finally coming alongside an abandoned super spaceship. The ship repels all attempts at boarding it until Blake's repeated brainwashing proves useful in blocking the alien ship's defense mechanisms. It does look a little cheap. The BBC still hasn't gotten around to dubbing proper sound effects on the Federation weapons. The acting, however, is top-notch. The model work is great, possibly because most of the season's effects budget was blown by the end of this episode, which is either really lousy planning or absolutely the best planning.
You could have won, Blake. All you needed was guts.
I'll settle for yours.
Cygnus Alpha is probably one of the better episodes of the first season, and one of the best in terms of the finished product. Avon, Jenna and Blake explore their new vessel, apparently a cartoon space vessel in some shots. They find some handguns, find what could be the only known working teleport system, and of course the ship's computer Zen.
You're a computer.
As you say, Avon.
Their new ship, rechristened the Liberator, heads to Cygnus Alpha with the idea of rescuing the rest of the prisoners of the spaceship London. Meanwhile, Vila and Gan have a few new friends who, funnily enough, we didn't see once on the entire 8-month journey, some of whom were originally slated to be part of Blake's crew. Cygnus Alpha is a gloomy-looking planet, but there is Kara. The planet is ruled by the High Priest Vargas, Lord Shouty McBluster, played by Brian Blessed, booming and bellowing like Meth Macbeth.
But with this, I could rule 1,000 planets!
Blake tries out the new teleport system before heading down to rescue anybody who wants to leave the planet. Shouty McBluster has other plans. He wants the Liberator to spread the word of his religion, but is instead teleported into space where he becomes an ice warrior before exploding. Gan in this episode is still an actual character, but like free parking, that won't last long. Time Squad is where all the spending on the first few episodes really starts to show up, and not in a good way. Liberator first finds a small spaceship holding 3 crew in suspended animation on the way to colonize a planet, while Blake intends to start fighting back by blowing up a Federation installation on the planet Saurian Major. He meets the only surviving member of the local freedom fighters, Callie, an outcast from the planet Avon.
Try that again and I'll blow your head off. Now, what are you doing here?
She's a telepath, so it's a good idea not to make any of your passwords anything like Callie smells 6969. Time Squad gives us Gan's only bit of backstory and introduces us to his limiter. Gan's limiter means he can't kill, and he has no other specialty, so we'll see how that works out for the character in the long run. There are some attempts at creepy scenes on the Liberator, and Knyvette gets to show us Jenna's fighting abilities. Callie's introduction as a badass freedom fighter is also cool. We get to see her fighting abilities. Take a good look, because both of these characters will become relatively sidelined in the next season. The ending where Blake and company destroy the reactor is so comically poorly staged that you thought you were watching a high school production of The Guns of Navarone, put on by people who'd never seen The Guns of Navarone. It's a mix of good and bad. But in some dodgy and very convenient maths,
You forgot Zen.
we now have our 7. The web skews heavily toward not great. There are some interesting ideas, much of which is poorly done. The Liberator is co-opted by some other outcasts from Avon into bringing the Liberator to a planet where the ship becomes wedged in some gooey stuff in space. It turns out trying to dramatically increase the yield of candy floss does have its drawbacks. The Decimers, engineered creatures played by a horde of little people, destroy a lab, and Blake gets to do some moralizing. Gareth Thomas and Paul Darrow have to do all of this and keep a straight face when talking to this body in a tank. The web finally shows us the crew acting together, but it's a dysfunctional unit. We'll also mention Deep Roy makes his first appearance in Blake 7. Seek, Locate, Destroy is an episode that has everything that the early part of the series had going for it. There's a lightning raid to steal a Federation cipher machine, which goes swimmingly to plan, apart from one tiny little wrinkle. Meanwhile, Blake's early successes have been causing problems for Federation Space Command and its leader, Supreme Commander Servalan. She's caught flack over the Blake affair, and she appoints the disgraced Space Commander Travers to bring Blake to justice. Or kill him, whatever's your poison. We get a little more of Blake's backstory, which handily also sets up Travis as the series' continuing villain. Travis is ruthless and will do anything to get Blake, basically the Inspector Gerard character like so many of the shows we cover from the 70s and 80s. When the show was being put together, they had hoped the Federation security robot would be popular with viewers. A large part of the show's minuscule budget went into the construction of this prop. To say things didn't go so well would be an understatement, like hospitalizations after that poorly researched yet best-selling cookbook extolling the virtues of chicken meat cooked rare. The character of Travis was possibly named something else before Stephen Greif was cast, but having Inspector Blakey chasing Blake would have been confusing. Seek, Locate, Destroy gives us our first proper look at the workings of the Federation, and at Blake and his band carrying out an actual raid wearing their natty anoraks.
I've come to blow something up.
The episode's a personal favourite as it's a perfect blend of action, adventure and drama.
Your time's running out, Blake. Your time and your luck.
Mission to Destiny tries to play around with the show's format. It's a murder mystery. The Liberator encounters a vessel travelling in circles in deep space. The crew have been knocked out and the pilot killed. Avon and Cully get a chance to shine as they help the crew repair the ship. Avon also plays detective. The ship had collected a valuable story device, the Neutrotope, but Blake offers to deliver the device faster. But of course, the Liberator has to travel across a dangerous part of space. It's a solid rather than outstanding episode, and not the type of story the show would revisit. It also had the virtue of being well within the show's budget and resources, so there is actually very little to complain about. And who would have thought that a whodunit would work in a series like Blake 7? Of course, after this episode, hands up who else wants to see Avon and Cully team up to solve mysteries in Avon and the Telepath. Duel is, well, it's a well-worn idea of super beings pitting the series lead and a single antagonist against each other in single combat. It had already been done famously in Star Trek and perhaps infamously in Space 1999. Travis catches up with the Liberator while it's recharging in orbit around a long-dead planet, but the ghosts of the planet teach Blake and Travis a lesson about death, also a lesson about the death of a friend. We get our first look at the mutoids, the Federation's semi-zombie grunts, who of course live off blood serum. Travis tries it on with his mutoid pilot, but gets shot down by a single plasma bolt.
How do you demonstrate the death of a friend to a man who hasn't got any?
Duel is a well-made piece of television and holds up as one of the best examples of the series and possibly the finest episode of the first year. Project Avalon is a little less successful but has a lot of running around and laser battles. Well, we think they're laser battles. We hadn't seen an awful lot of the Liberator's handguns in operation so far, and now perhaps they needn't have bothered. Project Avalon details Blake's attempts to free a captured resistance leader, while the Federation have instead created a robot duplicate as a Trojan horse in a bid to capture the Liberator intact. We have Jenna, the Terminator, laying waste to what looks like dozens of Federation troops unknowingly armed with pop guns. In this one episode, Travis has a mutoid companion in the form of Glynis Barber, who of course would later become a series regular. The cruddy security robot makes its final appearance in the show. And of course, there's another robot. It's above average for the season, but the rest of the year's episodes will make it painfully clear that the budget has been spent by this point. They couldn't even spare a few pennies for clothes for Avalon. Unless of course Patrick Stewart helped them out with the script.
I've seen it all.
Breakdown is a Gann episode, and pretty much the only Gann episode of the entire series. And even then, it's an episode about saving Gann's life, rather than an episode where David Jackson has any major acting challenges. Gann's limiter implant is malfunctioning, and so he goes haywire in the early part of the episode. Then he's sedated, released, goes on another rampage, before taking a space siesta for the rest of the episode. By the halfway point, I think we all know how he feels. In trying to find a medical facility in range, the ship, of course, has to cross a dangerous part of space again. Avon has cracked the shits and delivered his notice. The neutral research station XK-72 has the facilities, but its genius surgeon Kane, played by Julian Glover, is a brilliant jerk's brilliant jerk, and he's a brilliant jerk that doesn't want a bar of helping Blake and his crew. Despite the station being officially neutral, Kane laments any lack of order, since the time some space yobbos keyed his brand new space shuttle. Breakdown is a fairly perfunctory episode, almost completely set on the Liberator, enlivened only by the guest performers. Breakdown is probably the first major instance of any people helping the Liberator crew ending up dead by the end of the episode. This will happen again and again, and by the end of the series, and of course this video, it will become a running gag. It is perhaps overlooked that Gann has multiple limiters. The other limiters stop Gann from telling dirty jokes at weddings, from running red lights, and to make sure that he never ever tries to do the robot. Bounty is another simple episode. Blake tries to convince a deposed president of a planet that his Federation keepers are the cause of his downfall. Meanwhile, a distress signal, another one, sees Jenna and company ignore her own advice from a previous episode.
It's a trick used by space pirates.
Nope, it was in fact a ruse by pirates to collect the bounty on Blake and the ship.
That was stupid.
Did not see that one coming. Jenna knows the lead pirate Tarrant and on the surface joins with them, but really she's slowly whittling down their number while Blake and the rest of the crew escape on their own. There are two stories here, the deposed politician feeling very sorry for himself and the rest of the crew feeling somewhat miffed that Jenna has apparently betrayed them. This is a story that, like a command hook, leaves no lasting impression. The 12th episode, Deliverance, sees the Liberator on a rescue mission to recover 2 ejection capsules after a space accident. One survivor is rescued, but again, somebody is left behind. This time it's Jenna. Avon, Gan and Vila return to the planet to search for her. Did we mention it's highly radioactive and they'll die if they stay down there for too long? I wonder if that's going to become an issue at any stage later on. Servalan fills in Travis on her latest plan to get the supercomputer Aurak that's worth hundreds of millions of credits for free. It's also the only time that Travis shows any emotion, but orders is orders. Jenna is captured by some primitives, Blake and Callie are held hostage by Ensor Jr., one of the survivors, and Avon is worshipped as the coming of a prophesied lord who can get a rocket off the ground.
As it was promised, the Lord Avon will save our race.
It's a solid effort. Aurak begins with a really low effort recap in Liberator's previously unseen study nook. The Liberator crew want to find out what this Aurak bizzo is all about. There's one small problem: Jenna, Gan, Vila and Avon received a massive dose of radiation in the previous episode. And wouldn't you know it, there are absolutely no anti-radiation treatments in Liberator's surgical outfit, which apparently is the finest and most advanced in the galaxy, so long as you're not seeking treatment for radiation. I mean, what's the likelihood of encountering dangerous levels of radiation in space? Anyway, them's the breaks. Blake and Callie teleport down with medical supplies for Aurak's creator Ensor, in the hope that a guy who's been in hiding for 40 years has the right anti-radiation medicine that has not passed its expiry date. Ensor is in poor health and in even poorer humour, but for reasons they'll have to travel to the surface by foot, and they'll have to carry this guy Aurak.
100 million for that?
Another problem, Servalan and Travis have shown up. Aurak is a smaller scale story, but made reasonably well. But for years I couldn't work out what was wrong with some of the interior shots, but then you realise you never see Stephen Greif, because he'd apparently injured himself, and so a double was playing Travis in the studio, with Greif dubbing his voice on later. Back on the ship, Aurak pulls out his party piece and tells everybody they're going to die.
Space vehicle will be destroyed.
And he wonders why nobody invites him over anymore. With Aurak's prediction that the Liberator will at some point soon be a cloud of space debris, the season ended on a cliffhanger.
That's all right. That's fixed Aurak.
No, it hasn't. The prediction has still been made.
Series B began with redemption. The crew have been shitting themselves over Aurak's prediction and have been checking all of the ship's systems. Blake, meanwhile, and also as usual, is in his own headspace and just watches the video of Aurak's prediction over and over again until Avon lets him in on the secret.
Look at the configuration of the stars.
2 vessels appear out of nowhere, 2 very familiar looking vessels, and pretty soon the Liberator is under the control of invaders. The twist, these are the people who originally built the Liberator. They're just reclaiming their lost property. Everybody here just accepts that it's theirs, not one person asks to see ID or a receipt or anything. On Spaceworld, humans are slave to the computer system, which is run by these 2 computerized ladies showing off the latest Lululemon gear. Before the Liberator crew can be executed, they manage to escape back to the ship, where of course the local who helps Blake escape is killed. Redemption really did kick off the new season with a fun and original tale. There is a lot to like, from the guest cast to some of the ideas, though the downside is the use of some rather dull stock footage and overacting mime artists. Everybody now gets fancier looking clothes this season, and there's a lot more leather about the place. Apparently the best way to have custom leather clothing made at the time, the BBC had to outsource to a shop in Soho that made fetish gear and bondage wear. Look, I'm wearing leather bondage gear right now. It's comfortable enough if you don't sit on the chain.
I got this shocking pain right behind the eyes.
Have you considered amputation?
So after 14 episodes of having to whip Terry Nation's flimsy first drafts into 50-minute episodes, script editor Chris Boucher finally gets a crack at a full script, and you can tell he'd had a lot of pent-up ideas. Blake wants to do a deal with a criminal organisation, the Terra Nostra, in order to use their resources against the Federation. But things don't go so well, and Blake, having picked up Jacko and his addict sister, discover the source of the drug Shadow, a right little earner for the Terra Nostra. Meanwhile, Callie's under telepathic attack, again, this time from aliens using Aurak as a conduit for an invasion. This episode has some good bits, but it is a case of so many ideas thrown at you, with most of them not explained until a very laborious wrap-up at the end of the episode. This may have worked much better as a two-parter, giving the ideas and the viewer some room to breathe. Despite this episode leaving so many potential threads for future stories dangling, almost none of them are ever mentioned again. This is also the first of 2 episodes this season to cut to the end credits just before an expensive special effect might be needed.
This thing tapped into Aurak's channels, sucked up all his energy, so that it could come squirting out and swallow us all.
Weapon features a convoluted plot that doesn't work in any satisfying way, with some ordinary direction letting down the whole endeavour. A Federation weapons technician has invented a deadly weapon and escaped with only a freed slave for company.
It's called Imipac.
Koza has also got a massive chip on his shoulder, though that may just be the weight of that collar. Look, the guy in the shop said it looks really cool.
It's called Imipac.
Meanwhile, Servalan wants to find Koza and get the weapon for herself, using a Blake clone to confuse Koza, and then there's the Federation psycho-strategist droning on about chess computers.
Beta-class weapons technician named Koza.
Chris Boucher again wrote this episode, and it's by far his least well thought out script for the whole series. It's messy and clunky, belaboured, poorly directed and staged.
Aren't you impressed?
We have a clone master, an overly confident Federation strategist, and look, Travis has grown about a foot. New Travis, played by Brian Croucher, does not come off as well as you need in order for everyone to forget about the recasting. You could say Brian Croucher is miscast, or you could put it down to the director and actor not getting along.
You are undoubtedly the sexiest officer I have ever known. Goodbye, Servalan.
Weapon reduces the Liberator Crew to side characters, concentrating for the most part on Servalan and new, not so improved Travis. And then there's Koza, who's one cranky shithead who got up on the wrong side of the bed, probably in the wrong bedroom and in someone else's house. And all of this drags like watching a test match in slow motion.
So that's Imipac.
In Horizon, the Liberator heads off to a far-off planet, finds a puppet ruler manipulated by a Federation official, and the crew of the Liberator lose their minds one by one. Or at least that's how it comes across. Blake and Jenna teleport down to a planet and then they are captured. Gan and Vila then teleport down and they are captured. Then Callie decides to teleport down. And well, look, you can see where this is going, even if Gan, Vila, Callie, Blake and Jenna couldn't. The only person who retained their wits somewhat was Avon.
You are expendable.
And you're not?
No, I'm not. I am not expendable. I'm not stupid. And I'm not going.
And now that everyone else has been captured, he decides, screw them, he can go it alone. Just as long as he never meets up against 3 Federation pursuit ships at the same time. Just then, Zen sees 3 Federation pursuit ships. Horizon, written by Alan Pryor, was the first time somebody previously unconnected with the series would write for the show, and this demonstrates how variable scripts from outside writers could be. The sad thing is, Horizon would not be his worst contribution. Pressure Point is a story that really should have been a standout for so many reasons, but in the end is a damp squib stored in a bucket of water at the bottom of the ocean. Blake finally launches an attack against the Federation on Earth, targeting the Central Control Computer Complex, which from the outside looks like a public toilet at a park. Blake's contacts are ambushed by Servalan, who seems to have forgotten her pants this week, unless her new title is Supreme Commando Servalan. Blake, Vila, Avon and Gan, of course, decide to carry on with their half-blaked plan, only to find an empty room.
We've done it! We've done it! We've done it! I've done it!
Blake, there's nothing here.
It was at this point that Blake realised he f***ed up. During their escape, Travis throws a grenade that collapses the structure, and Gan is killed. Well, what should have been an exciting episode is let down by some of the dullest and least imaginative direction of, well, at least this season.
Gan's dead.
To show how deep the complex goes, the same shots of the crew climbing down a ladder on a blank wall are repeated, just with different coloured lighting and the same camera angles over and over. It does take a lot to dilute the action to the point where you just want this over and on to the next episode. Gan's dead. Oh yeah, Gan's dead. Oh no, Gan's dead. Anyway, by this point someone had to die and Gan drew the short straw. Pressure Point is the sort of episode that has no major special effects, monsters, complex makeup or much chroma key, yet still somehow looks incredibly cheap and tacky and very low effort, like my Godzilla fan movie where he just stands in the middle of Tokyo and lets rip. On the other hand, Trial is a cracking episode by Chris Boucher, directed by Derek Martinez. Travis is on trial for his role in a massacre of civilians from 3 years previous. It seems to be a completely different massacre from the one he was originally under suspension for when we had first met him. Blake is feeling some guilt over Gan's death. Oh no, Gan's dead. while Avon reels at Blake playing the rest of the crew for fools.
He really cares about us, doesn't he?
You swallowed that?
You think he was faking it?
Everything but the self-pity.
On an apparently uninhabited planet, Blake meets Zill, a rare alien life form on the series who turns out to be a flea on a giant living organism ready to absorb anything with a pulse. Blake finds the will to carry on and is rescued by the Liberator Crew. To avenge Gan, they attack Space Command just as Travis is sentenced to death. Travis survives the attack. It's a rather half-hearted one, with the Liberator causes a little bit of damage and then leaves before finishing the job. Travis and Servalan part on the understanding he'll hunt Blake while she'll hunt both of them. This is by far Brian Crouch's best episode of the series. If we'd have had this level of writing and direction and performance, the second season version of Travis might not have made you feel like your football team has been relegated. Also, Tosh, or future The Bill star Kevin Lloyd, appears as one of Travis's former subordinates. Trial will be, rather unfortunately for Gan, be the absolute last time anybody ever mentions the character in the series.
It really is a pity he's got to die. He's so much better than anything I've got left.
Killer is a story in two parts. Both parts minimise Callie and Jenna to the point where Gan almost gets more lines and he's been dead for 2 episodes. Avon and Vila teleport down to a Federation base where Avon leans on an old criminal buddy for help, while Blake teleports down to a different part of the base to watch a salvage operation that turns into a deadly outbreak of an alien disease. It's quite a good episode, well written by Robert Holmes and decently directed. It's also the story where the costumes this season seriously got out of control. People on this base wear plastic Macintoshes, perhaps because the sprinkler system is dodgy. Then there are these firefighters. Oh, and then finally we have these spacesuits. You might be there mockingly thinking, wow, they ripped off the Michelin Man. It is actually far worse. They borrowed 4 Michelin Man suits from the tire company. I mean, it could have been worse. They could have borrowed the mascot suits from McDonald's. Upon reflection, the thought that Michelin had 4 spare Michelin Man costumes to lend to the BBC is kinda hot. Hostages are pretty ordinary, and let's just say it, not particularly good episode where Travis kidnaps Blake's cousin.
Her name is Inga, if you remember.
Travis is now a fugitive, but at the same time, he's also the one-armed man.
Travis, a Quinn Martin production. Starring Brian Croucher as Travis, a Quinn Martin production.
Blake shows up knowing it's a trap and is soon betrayed by his father's brother Ashton. They try really hard not to call Ashton Blake's uncle because Blake has a sort of thing going with Inga, his first cousin. New to this episode only, Crimos. Not new to this episode, reusing that footage of the Ice Warrior exploding in space.
Where did you send him?
Into space.
Jenna and Callie have almost nothing to do until the very end when Jenna brings down some teleport bracelets and glares at Inga, while Blake hides his embarrassment by doing what he does best, being a dick. The mutoids in this story now seem to be wearing the cheapest wigs the BBC could find. However, if you or a member of your family know where the BBC can source cheaper wigs, please send details to I've Heard Tell of Cheap Wigs, care of BBC Television, London, UK. Blake 7 came at a weird time for featuring women in an action-adventure series. In later seasons, Servalan would be the show's main villain, and all 4 of the women who would crew the ships would be created as characters who could more than hold their own in a battle. Yet often in the second series, they would be sidelined. Anytime you chose the coward Vila as your backup, as Avon does here, over a battle-hardened resistance fighter or a smuggler, then it does kinda seem like a patronising own goal. Like airport customs officials switching over to drug-sniffing cats. Countdown sees a revolution on a Federation planet succeed, but not before the garrison commander has armed a massive bomb that will destroy the planet very soon. Into all of this, Blake, Avon, and of course Vila arrive looking for Space Major Provine, who conveniently will have some information about the Federation's computer control complex. Remember that?
Star 1. It's called Star 1 now.
Callie, stop that, will you please? I'm sorry.
Here is an Avon episode where we learn about his backstory and of his lost love Anna Grant, since Avon has to work with her brother Del Grant, who is hell-bent on revenge. Paul Darrow is often a fine actor, but on occasion he can fall into some traps. Here in one scene, it does appear as though he is barely conscious while delivering his lines explaining the plot. What's not readily apparent? That Darrow was ill that day, and they made use of a backup android version of Darrow.
That was not the way it was.
I like the episode for the most part, though it's very Terry Nation. Voice from the Past is a spectacularly poorly written and mostly not well made episode. Blake is being controlled by a telepathic control circuit. The former Federation Arbiter General Van Glend, who had ordered Blake to be set up as a child molester, has apparently defected to the side of the rebels and is looking to mount a legal case against the Federation. He's working with Governor Legrand and a heavily bandaged rebel leader Siobhan.
You imagine I haven't smelt you out?
It's either him or the papier-mâché dummy from Escape from Alcatraz. Of course, there are no prizes for guessing who Siobhan turns out to be. There is some nice model work, and this bit where Servalan takes over a major screen in the conference centre that usually hosts the like of the Northwestern Vauxhall Dealers Association is nicely edited, but the studio scenes are quite amateurish and plodding and sluggish, and any other pejoratives I can think of. We had Space City earlier this season, and in Gambit we now have Freedom City, which is exactly the same thing, just biggerer and betterer. One storyline has Blake hunting for cyber surgeon Dockley, but Travis has already become the Medico's bodyguard. Servalan tries to buy the help of Freedom City's Big Cheese, and then there's another story involving Avon and Vila using a shrunken Aurak to bust the casino. It's all very arch, with over-the-top costumes either borrowed from BBC stock or recovered from the local tip. Robert Holmes has a knack for dialogue that rolls off the tongue, but the direction of this episode is really sluggish and lets it down. It's just a ball of cheese rolling down a hill towards a dump truck. Such were the time pressures many series were made under. Here's a scene where the drama and acting was fine, but clearly the actors can't get Dockley's coat on. It's the sort of thing most people wouldn't realise unless, like me, they've watched this show dozens of times. Deep Roy makes his second appearance in Blake 7, and this is the only time he appeared without extensive makeup. Deep Roy would later best be known as the Oompa Loompas in Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Thusly, this appearance shall be entered into the Guinness Book of Deep Roy. Has he got his coat on yet? The Keeper is a relatively slight episode where Blake, Jenna and Vila are trying to find out which royal has a brain print on a necklace. It's simple and mostly well done. It's almost all talk apart from some action on location and a rather theatrical duel in the studio. It's one of the few episodes to focus on Jenna, and Sally Knyvette does a really good job of trying to charm the local warlord who's decided he wants to marry her. You might remember Bruce Purchase as the pirate captain in Doctor Who. Vila also gets a chance to shine here, showing off magic tricks as a court jester. So that whole gag about Liberator moving out of orbit just when someone needs teleport shows up here once again. Avon and Callie take the ship out of orbit to hunt down a Federation ship which may or may not have Travis, but later on they allow an actual ship carrying Travis to pass. Mainly because they need him for the next episode. Star 1 starts with a space accident as proof that Star 1, the Federation's central computer complex, is breaking down. Star 1 is a concept, a computer that controls everything hidden on the far edge of the galaxy, makes sense for drama, but it is a lousy location for a data center. Using Star 1 cloud storage takes about 3 months just to retrieve a backup of your photos if you happen to drop your phone in the toilet. When it starts going bung, you just can't call up a technician to fix it because one thing, the call-out fees, oh man, the call-out fees, and two, in some spectacularly poorly thought out planning,
no one knows where Star 1 is.
You know who does know where it is? This guy. Liberator sets course for a planet on the far edge of the galaxy, the last stop before heading off into a very long journey between galaxies. Now that is range anxiety. Meanwhile, Servalan has used Star 1's downtime as an excuse to stage a coup and take over the presidency. There are a bunch of technicians dedicated to maintaining Star 1, except it looks as though all bar one of them have been replaced by alien doubles. Blake, Callie and Avon arrive with the idea of blowing up the computer complex, despite the knock-on effect this will have. Avon doesn't care because he wants the Liberator. Blake doesn't care because he's Blake. There's evidence of a massive minefield in space. Aurak surmises it's a deterrent against hostile action from neighbouring galaxy Andromeda, or to give its proper scientific name, Mass Effect Andromeda. It appears Travis has gotten sick of all the toing and froing with Servalan and finally landing on Fro. He's hooked up with the alien invaders.
You don't have to explain it to me, I only came for the ride.
Star 1 is a mostly well-made and well-acted show. Servalan gets a competent scientific advisor but he's never heard from again. Travis is finally killed, but the last few scenes do feel a little rushed and anticlimactic. Blake's exit is so uninspiring that it's almost like writer Chris Boucher decided, well, Gareth Thomas is gone, so...
I have always trusted you.
from the very beginning.
The episode ends with Avon agreeing to hold off the aliens until the Federation arrive. It is a beautifully tense scene, and then boom, for the second time this season, we cut to the end credits just before the BBC have to create a fancy space battle. And as we shall soon see, they have ways around that. With that, Blake and Jenna are out of the series. The show was still quite successful, and so a third season was ordered, but at the time it looked to be the last. So how would the series fare after Blakexit? Well, we finished the last season with a button being pressed. In the opening minutes of the third season, we get to see the space battle representing the intergalactic war. And you almost wish they hadn't even bothered, because really they didn't. The Great Intergalactic War is depicted almost completely through stock footage from previous episodes, edited together with some voiceovers. The footage itself isn't terrible, nor is the way it's edited together. The criteria they use to select the footage is head-scratching. You've got a space liner and various freighters from previous episodes, all now warships, as is Space City, a satellite, which is now apparently a battlecruiser. The few scenes in this episode on the Liberator Bridge are devoid of any of the crew, and we just see some pre-filmed footage of Avon, Callie and Vila getting into individual escape capsules. But there is some important business tucked away here.
Where's Jenna? We haven't got to wait for her, have we?
Jenna's gone with Blake.
Throughout this episode, we'll be given some context about the intergalactic war, through downed Federation officers like Space Captain Mike Yates and others. Avon's capsule lands on Tarrant, a planet inhabited by some medieval-level warrior types, and then he's rescued by Dayna. Dayna, her adopted sister and father, all weapons designers, live in the spaceship under the sea. In rescuing Avon, Dayna's also had to bring along Servalan.
Still very confused, but there's not much doubt the aliens were virtually wiped out.
Well, the price was high enough, but at least we got what we paid for.
The Federation, we're told, have won the intergalactic war, but is in such disarray that the galaxy is open to whoever can unite it with force. A ship like the Liberator might just be the ticket. Servalan tries to corrupt Avon, but Avon's having none of that.
Imagination my only limit. I'd be dead in a week.
Throughout this episode and the next, we'll get the vaguest hints about the whereabouts of Blake and Jenna, both of whom are no longer active characters in the show. This is now Paul Darrow's television series, and he grasps the mantle of lead with aplomb, grabs the bull by the horns, while I look up other tired ways of saying just how good he was. Josette Simon was barely out of acting school in her first role on television and totally owns Dayna. It's not yet clear that she'll become a regular, but we don't know who's going to be around and who's not until the end of the next episode.
She's very good.
Promising. Quite promising.
As a result of this show, Dayna will have a personal mission to kill Servalan, a desire that she will carry through to the end of the series. Her beef with Servalan is because Servalan murdered her father, and not because of the embarrassment when they both realise they have the same haircut.
I don't understand.
After these first two episodes, the show will do an absolutely terrible job of keeping the events of the war straight. It's the intergalactic war, but later on it becomes the galactic war. It either lasted for hours or days, and then much later it was something that took place over a much longer time frame and possibly many years ago, which is concerning because Vila, Callie and Avon were possibly wearing the same clothes all along. As Zen is fond of saying, the teleport was not designed to remove skid marks. Oh, and since this was filmed on a public beach, it's possible to occasionally spot beachgoers.
Summary execution is the usual punishment for boarding a Federation ship without authority. What are you doing on my ship?
Power Play, apparently first in production for the season, is a direct continuation of Aftermath. While Avon was away, 2 Federation vessels docked with Liberator and are now claiming it for themselves. Firstly, there's Section Leader Clegg and his brutal death squad, and secondly, Tarrant, a Federation space captain. Any resemblance between Section Leader Clegg and a Deputy Headmaster is purely coincidental.
That's a difficult way to commit suicide.
Maybe he was cleaning it and it went off.
Along the way, members of the death squad are knocked off one by one, and it turns out Tarrant is not what he seems.
He didn't kill those men. I did.
He was a space captain, but he'd become a freelance pirate and adventurer. Meanwhile, Callie has been rescued by a hospital ship from a neutral planet who also rescues Servalan. On another planet, Vila has been found first by some primitive types and then some glamorous bounty hunters. But, you know, things really did go downhill for Resistance leader Avon, didn't they? Vila and Callie meet up at a hospital only for things to go really south.
It's an organ bank.
I can't move!
This is still one of Blake Seven's all-time creepiest moments.
There'll be no pain. We ensure that all life is extinguished before surgery begins.
It's another solid ep directed by the show's producer David Maloney, setting up the 5 members of the crew for this season.
You want Blake, I'd have recognized him.
And too intelligent for Vila.
It was an even bet.
With that, the series has been realigned. The Federation is not as diminished as was suggested, Servalan is president of whatever's left and still chasing the Liberator. Blake and Jenna are gone, slyly replaced by Tarrant and Dayna. And crucially, Avon is in charge. But with the Federation threat seemingly gone and Avon in not too much hurry to search for Blake, the rest of the season can often feel directionless, like a scout who's repaired their compass with a polo mallet. Then we hit Volcano, a show that has some interesting enough ideas, but very little of it comes together all that well, like trying to make homemade epoxy resin with ginger ale and washing detergent. Dayna and Tarrant are on the planet Obsidian looking for allies and a home base. Servalan, meanwhile, is trying to rebuild her empire, but now the Federation are using battle cruisers that look like a dead whale had baby dead whales. The pacifists on the planet are not interested in Tarrant's sales pitch. They are led by Hauer, who of course is played by Michael Gough.
It's Michael Gough, it's Michael Gough, it's Michael Gough.
Servalan's scheme to capture the Liberator also goes south, when Avon seeks Zen to automatically blast the Federation fleet to pieces. It seems the days of the Liberator unable to fend off 3 piddly pursuit ships is over. The secret was to let loose Zen, the god of war. The action is marginally more exciting than the stock footage war we saw at the start of the season, but like Gan, that's neither here nor there. This is a story that could have done with better scripting and tighter direction in the studio, though I do appreciate them casting Frankie Howard's stunt double as a Federation commander. Volcano is the last time, almost, that any semblance of a search for Blake is entertained, at least for quite a time. Perhaps it was just as well, because another show decided to go in search of Blake. Dawn of the Gods is another disappointing episode, rather sloppily executed in the first half, though like Darth Maul, it does pick up a tad in the second half. Liberator is drawn off course and pulled into a black hole that's even more disappointing than the 1979 film. There's a cast-off god from Aron who's kidnapped all manner of ships in order to, I don't know, take over the galaxy or some shit. It's usually that. Avon tries to save his neck by getting into a spacesuit, Tarrant rebukes Avon for said action, Vila is a complete idiot dazed by painted on teeth, less scary than Bonnie Langford cosplay. This is an almost but not quite complete mess. Of course, the one speaking role on the side of our heroes has to die by the end of the episode. Callie at least gets a few moments to shine later on.
You mustn't see me!
I have to see you if I am to kill you.
Harvest of Kairos as a title is misleading, since nobody on Kairos is called Harv, let alone somebody being the most Harv, as in the harvest. Kairos is a planet where humans can only exist for 1 week, after which the planet is too deadly, and it's also the source of Chiropan, which is equal first with 500 other valuable elements on the most valuable substance in the universe list, and also one that will never be mentioned again. Meanwhile, a worker in Servalan's space station has been throwing shade, saying she's scared of Tarrant, who has suddenly become the most famous space captain in the Federation.
Have you nothing to say to Servalan?
Woman, you're beautiful.
Jarvik is also channeling Hemingway while trying to have his way with Servalan. Avon is preoccupied with a rock, Sopran, that distorts perception to make it look like a bigger version of whatever is looking at it. So much so, it's left to the others to allow Jarvik's men to take over the Liberator with less fuss than invading France. With the planet deadly to humans and Liberator about to bomb the planet, the crew take to the skies in an abandoned lunar lander to take back the Liberator with a mocked-up version of Sopran, called, I can't believe it's not Sopran.
Detector scan reveal it to be a high-technology space cruiser,
which fools the invaders, where of course Jarvik gets shot by his own men, so we'll never see him again. Very, very ordinary, but we're about to get a run of some very good to excellent episodes. City at the Edge of the World sees Vila bullied by Tarrant into doing some contract work, but it's a ruse by the criminal Babin the Butcher, who needs Vila's talents to open a vault in a ruined city. There he spars with Babin's gun hand Carol, which turns out to be a meet cute, since he'll later open the vault, find a matter transmitter gateway to another world, which leads Vila and Carol to engage in afternoon delight.
We should be dead by now.
Are you bragging or complaining?
Vila does get him some. I've not always found the third season as a whole to be the tightest of seasons, but it does do one thing right that no other season does very well, in that it gives each actor at least one episode where they are the focus. Michael Keating didn't get a lot of shows where Vila was the driving force of the entire episode, and here the character is pushing the story forward and provides the resolution. Yes, Colin Baker appears as a man toppled off the Federation's most wanted list by Blake.
You're top of the Federation's most wanted list, after Blake.
What do you mean, after Blake? I was working my way up that list before he crept out of his creche.
Some say his portrayal of Babin was better than that of his doctor. Others say Babin went, how shall we say, a little over the top, like a helium-filled toupee. But either way, when Paul Darrow was later to appear on Doctor Who, he reciprocated in kind.
Admit defeat, Doctor.
Never!
The most luminous force in this part of the galaxy.
Really?
In Children of Aron, Servalan infects the entire planet of Aron, Callie's homeworld, with a deadly disease so she can capture the Liberator. Another benefit is she's able to use Aron's baby-making technology to make some baby Servalans. Meanwhile, her two ambitious underlings are sniping and backstabbing each other over who was promoted to captain. Children of Aron is not a terrible episode. The production is at least solid and nothing is outright bad, but it just feels a little underwhelming. We finally get to see Aron after so many cryptic comments about their culture, and all we get is an isolationist version of Earth. Bland architecture, bland people with nothing remotely exotic. Here, telepathy is presented as a recent development as a result of cloning. Callie briefly meets her identical sister Zelda, who makes very little impression, and then because this is Blake 7, we kill everybody. And in this episode, I mean everybody. In this episode, we have Aron's leaders marched off to be executed, the entire planet infected, and all bar a few dying off, and even Servalan, who we all love to hate since Jacqueline Pearce is so great, manages to kill her own offspring. And then after all of that, this is how the episode ends. You see, that's how The Notebook should have ended. Oh, and there's Patrick Troughton's son, Michael, later to star in the 80s comedy The New Statesman. In rumours of death, Avon returns to Earth to hunt down whoever killed his girlfriend, Anna Grant. He follows the trail, but it does not lead him to the answer he was expecting. Paul Darrow gets to growl, to be sad, to threaten, to lose hope, and then to laugh it off again at the end. On Earth, a failed rebellion has taken place, but apparently not yet done, with rebels capturing Servalan, but before she can be forced to resign, in blunders Avon and company. It is a great episode. It's also a bit confusing in places because before the episode a rebellion took place on Earth that almost succeeded, but Servalan's forces were back on top. And then in this episode, the rebels regroup and take over Servalan's palace and capture her in order to force her to resign peacefully, but then our gallant crew start shooting the rebels before the Federation turn up to retake, and yes, do you see what I mean? Avon gets the news that he was dreading. Anna Grant was a Federation agent all along. There are two Federation officers watching over things, getting all of the supposedly funny dialogue that the writer had wanted to get out of his system, before of course he kills them off. One of them here, David Haig, became popular in British films and TV as a buffoon, while the other is playing his role here with an ill-advised American accent.
And then walk through the bay on his way back.
Why do I never know what you're thinking, Avon?
As has been noted by Paul Darrow, Avon, or Kerr Avon to give his full name, is such a tough guy. Even Anna calls him Avon in bed. And despite all of her aliases, she really was named Anna Grant, since we've already met her brother Del Grant in Season 2. Sarcophagus is a show that probably needs multiple viewings to fully understand, but after a lengthy, context-free prologue of an alien funeral ceremony, we have a story where Callie is taken over by a centuries-dead creature who uses her form to generate a new physical body for itself, and of course, take over the ship so it can return home. There's supernatural creepiness, deadly powers, metaphors galore, possibly because Metaphors Galore was having a sale on metaphors, allusions, sayings, and proverbs that week. A sale that would prove time is money. Sarcophagus is that episode of Blake 7 that veers most into space fantasy, from writer Tanith Lee. She would be the only woman to write for the show, but her 2 episodes really would push the series parameters further than anyone else. As a youngster, I hated these episodes, but as an adult, these are great, and for want of a better description, the most Star Trek-y episodes. Ultraworld broke the streak of above-average episodes with something that's pedestrian, more pedestrian than an outdoor mall during a public transport strike in the middle of a fuel shortage. Liberator encounters an artificial planet, Ultraworld, and its 3 operatives, the Ultra. There's Ultra 1, Ultra 2, and Ultra 4. Ultra 3 was off this week. Ultraworld's mission is to gather information, and part of that is that they need to watch Tarrant and Dayna having sex. I'll allow it. Ultraworld turns out to have a giant brain in its core. Well, I guess it looks like a brain, if I'm being charitable. Oh, and Callie and Avon have their minds transferred to a storage cylinder.
The memory tubes. I just hope they're in the right order.
You mean you could have got them?
The locations add a lot of production value, though most of the episode degenerates into running around while the plot unfolds. And then there's Vila teaching Aurak incredibly painful jokes.
There was a young man from where? Think. Can't remember.
This was writer Trevor Hoyle's only produced script for the series, though he would adapt a number of episodes into 3 novelizations released during the series' run. Moloch has to be one of the worst episodes of the show, and it's no surprise that it's a Ben Steed script with misogynist characters, poor plotting, and it's also one of director Via Lorimer's few duds in terms of direction. Some planet on the edge of space has a force field that makes it invisible. Servalan shows up to inspect remnants of her fleet, only to find she's been duped by some deserting Federation troops who want to use her ship as a blueprint to make a new fleet to take over the Federation.
That's my ship.
My ship.
This planet has a network of scanners and mass converters to basically reproduce almost anything. Like somebody who's bought themselves a 3D printer and now insists on giving you homemade Funko Pops every birthday. Moloch is a bad taste in your mouth, like drinking cranberry after brushing your teeth.
There's nothing any one of you can do. The Liberator is mine.
It's not all terrible. Vila basically quits at one stage after more cajoling from Tarrant. Then he briefly teams up with Servalan, a double act we would never see again. And then we have long scenes in this room where characters try to explain the plot, a plot that really isn't all that interesting. Then, in the space of 60 seconds, every guest artist still alive at this point is killed off, lest, somebody survived to the end of the episode. Also, as Deep Roy voiced Moloch, we'll add another one to the Deepometer. I think I've seen Doran's YouTube channel recommended to me a few times, but I think I'll pass.
My problem was always women.
You like them?
No.
Death Watch is that cheap episode towards the end of the season, but in the case of Blake 7, they would generally write an episode each year to be affordable without large casts, special effects, and lots of sets. Its only major cost was a wig, and some furniture pads. As a result, we have one of the series' best episodes. Maybe it's because most of it revolves around Dita Tarrant, Del Tarrant's older brother. 2 planetary alliances avoid wars with each other by use of a proxy fighter or a champion, such as Dita. Servalan shows up, and Avon gets another snog, which by my snogometer makes 4 this season. This was an episode where some folks were mad that Dita died and Del didn't, since they liked Dita more. Terminal saw Terran Nation return to write the final episode of the year and of the series as a whole. Avon is acting even more secretively than usual. He's belligerent, at one point threatening to kill Tarrant if he doesn't shut the f*** up. Look, we've all been there in the office and somebody comes collecting for Jay's birthday cake. Look, fuck you, Jay. I know it was you, Jay, who narked on me for parking in the boss's parking space. As is usual in Blake 7, there's some anomaly in space, and rather than take a bit longer to go around it, Avon decides to plough through it. Look, I'm sure it's nothing and we'll hear no more about it.
I needed the Liberator to bring me here, so I had no choice but to bring you along, but this is as far as you go. Understand this. Anyone who does follow me, I'll kill them.
I'm guessing that's a definite no for Secret Santa. On the planet Terminal, Avon finds a heavily injured Blake, but it turns out to be a ruse by Servalan to get the Liberator. Meanwhile, Vila and Dayna are dealing with the damage caused by the anomaly the ship flew through earlier. Fluid particles have eaten away at the ship to the point where Zen can't do much about it. Boy, do I have egg on my face. Also, it takes Vila and Dayna some time to notice that the Liberator seems to have a bad head cold, spewing snot out of every crack. The episode is nicely made for the most part, with a creepy atmosphere and the cast on their toes. This is the last entry in the Deepometer, which sees Deep Roy as a small, primate-like link that's not really visible in the final program, who Stephen Pacey managed to throw too far, which injured the diminutive actor. Servalan has won, stranding the crew on Terminal.
What about Blake?
Blake is dead.
While she has the Liberator, except
maximum power.
You know those stories where somebody buys themselves a new Porsche and then crashes it when leaving the dealership? Well, it doesn't look like Servalan's new ride will pass its MOT. And that was it. Blake 7 ended with 3 series and 39 episodes. Servalan didn't win, but the crew are stranded on a hostile planet. Now that's a downbeat ending. There is no possible way you could get any more of a downbeat ending. But as script editor Chris Boucher might have said, hold my beer. On its first showing in March 1980, a BBC continuity announcer announced over the closing credits that Blake 7 would return for a new series in 1981, which was certainly news to the cast and crew who had been assured that the 3rd season was the last.
That was the absolutely final and very last episode of Blake 7 ever. In fact, I will bet £50,000 that there will be no more Blake 7 ever. What's that? I'm being handed a piece of paper. Blake 7 will return in 1981. Ah, shit.
18 months later, a reformatted Blake 7 returns, now produced by Vila. Rescue follows on shortly after the events of Terminal. Callie is killed off screen, and the crew rescued by salvage operator Dorian. Scratch that, incredibly creepy salvage operator Dorian, a guy who has the vibe of a celebrity dentist. Dorian has a rickety old cargo ship, Scorpio, but it's got a tricked out computer, Slave, advanced handguns, and what looks suspiciously like an attempt at a teleport system. Back at Dorian's home as Xenon base, we're introduced to his girlfriend, the gunfighter Soolin. But it appears Dorian is hiding a secret. Well, it's a secret to anybody who hasn't heard of the portrait of Dorian Gray. Dorian is 200 years old, kept youthful by a creature deep underneath the base who absorbs his corruption. Thing is, it needs a constant supply of fresh meat. And Jesus Christ, that's a sea devil. It's a pretty confident restarting of the series, and Blake 7 finally looks like a 1980s production than a 70s show. Power is Ben Steed doing its thing, where Xenon base is rigged to explode, while the crew get in the middle of the final days of the local battle of the sexes. The men, the homics, have regressed to primitivism, while the Seska have advanced technology and are able to use telekinesis and project energy. Both Avon and Dayna take on the homic leader in single combat, and then the new teleport system is working after the crystals the Seska use to control their power happens to be the missing ingredient. This is the one and only story by this writer that turned out alright. Look, okay, I'm a Series D baby, but I'm all aboard this season's hype train.
But once you have war between the sexes, you eventually run out of people.
Traitor is Robert Holmes' return to the series for the first time since Series B. The Federation have suddenly started to expand very quickly. Tarrant and Dayna investigate the happenings on Hellitrix and find the Federation's expansion is fueled by the drug Pylene 50, spearheaded by somebody called Commissioner Sleer. Meanwhile, somebody has bumped off the new puppet ruler of Hellitrix, and guess what? Deposed President Servalan is back, baby, hiding in plain sight under a new identity as Commissioner Sleer. In a futuristic world that was imagined before facial recognition software and apparently before photo ID, the former president can apparently operate in the open as Sleer, so long as nobody has a portrait of the former president hanging in their lounge. Otherwise, it's a pretty solid episode that finally gets our gang to pull their fingers out when it comes to dealing with the threat posed by the Federation. Traitor is a solid action-adventure show, perhaps let down by staging a climactic fight scene in the studio. It does mark an important moment in Avon's development.
I always thought your idea of having a combat base was crazy.
Vila, I won't run.
Traitor also has a few familiar faces, a heavily discounted Davros, and of course, wouldn't you know it, something went wrong with the teleport. And when that was working, Avon has to take the ship out of orbit for a while. The classics never go out of style. Why have Servalan deposed and back as Sleer? There was some question over whether Jacqueline Pearce's health would allow her to appear in the 4th series, and so Sleer was initially created as a new villain. The next 2 episodes are where I suspect the 4th year's lesser reputation with old school fans was cemented like the feet of a mob informer. Star Drive is a show that starts with Scorpio tussling with an asteroid that leads it to track down the designer of a new star drive, which leads them to the Space Rats. Space Rats are, well, an amalgam of Hell's Angels and punk, embarrassing themselves and the showmakers in every conceivable way.
I am not going to have 3,000 hours of work put at risk by a couple of freaks who never take a bath.
Don't need a bath. Sweats regular.
The plot and story are decent enough. Scorpio needs a new star drive, have to steal it away from some Eurovision rejects, but it's an episode where the director will have long sequences of people creeping around or cutting a hole through the wall with Imipack no less, or the same shot resealing a hull breach, or using every single frame of Scorpio on its hydraulic platform. There are some fun shootouts at the end while Soolin in particular lays waste to the space rats, some mucking about on tricycles, and this little RV. The Scorpio crew rescued the engine designer Dr. Plaxton, but left her assistant behind. Dr. Plaxton has to wire in the new star drive to escape Federation pursuit ships who have fired plasma bolts at Scorpio, and while the clock's ticking, she stops to take a gander. The idea that a top engine researcher would work for a group like the Space Rats is a bit of a stretch, like Oppenheimer developing the atom bomb for Al Capone.
What about Dr. Plaxton?
Star Drive is, like Thomas Cromwell, a poorly executed mess. But if you thought that was bad, let me tell you friends about Animals, easily the worst episode of the season and a contender for the very worst of the entire show. Dayna pops in on an old tutor, the scientist Justin, to try and recruit him to their cause, but rekindles an old attraction. Servalan steps in and makes Dayna hate him, so she will betray him. Then the Scorpio crew turn up, and then guess what? Everybody's dead. Let's ignore the minor facts that they didn't get the guest artist to come on location, or the fact that Dayna is only around 21, so her tutor from years ago would, oh my. Sure, it's creepy as hell, even though the script was originally written with Callie in mind. The plot of this story all revolved around something called the Galactic War several years ago, which seems to have lasted a while and was quite a long time ago. And Justin had been the head of this research base for a time before that war, which must mean Dayna was how old exactly?
Disgusting.
The episode treats the war as if it was a very long time ago, rather than just 3 years as implied by the previous episode. And look at me, I'm trying to justify a terrible script.
They have just enough intelligence.
Sure, if there was a hitherto unmentioned galactic war that took place before the intergalactic war, the one where the aliens invaded.
But they were there on Bucol 2 towards the end of the war.
Oh, I've done it again, trying to rationalise something that doesn't make a lick of sense. Bless. Oh, and it does look like Avon nearly blows Tarrant's head off, just before Servalan comically brainwashes Dayna, described as aversion therapy towards Justin. Dayna acts as if Servalan had not in fact murdered Dayna's father, whereas every other time Dayna was anywhere near Servalan, Dayna would fill with a revengeful rage and attempt to kill Servalan. Here, Dayna acts as though she's been pulled over for speeding.
Every time you see him, you're going to hate him.
Servalan undoes the brainwashing, but then Justin manages to get killed while saving Dayna. Blake 7 often used Dayna well as part of the ensemble, especially as a double act with Tarrant. But with this being her only featured episode of the year, then Animals is a wasted opportunity for the character and for viewers. Also, Justin is just the worst. Headhunter starts off with an ordinary mission about Scorpio collecting a potential ally, the cyberneticist Muller. I'm sure nothing untoward will happen to... Oh, no, he's dead. Something's up on Scorpio with computerized systems playing up, including Slave. But it turns out Muller is not so dead, so Avon and company will have to make do with the death of Muller's wife. And then it turns out Muller was Muller's android all along. Somehow, and incredibly yuckily when you think about it, balancing the real severed head of Muller on top. Look, I won't elaborate, but from personal experience of balancing a severed head, look, you really need a good elastic cargo strap. But we'll put to one side how the mouth moves, the eyes blink, etc. As I said, I've tried this in the past, and the hardest part is drinking convincingly. I rather enjoyed Headhunter. It's a mystery, then a horror movie, and then finally a Terry Nation style adventure where everyone has their part in the solution.
Join us, Soolin. We can fulfill your every desire.
You wouldn't know where to start.
It's one of the few Blake 7s that looks at the dangers of AI running amok. Soolin finally becomes something of a character in this episode, and for once it's Tarrant and Dayna who come up with a way to ensure that Avon's quest in no way moves forward. I like the episode Assassin for one reason only, in that it's the last truly awful episode of Blake 7. Avon allows himself to be captured by slavers in order to find an assassin hired by Servalan. The second half of the episode is Avon, Tarrant and Soolin sniping at each other while they hunt down the assassin known as Cancer. Of course, the twist is, in this case, Cancer literally was the friend we made along the way. So here's an episode with an intriguing idea. Servalan hiring a professional to kill off the crew, and then the assassin turns out to be the hysterical dancer Piri. But the episode in no way delivers on the interesting premise, like ordering lobster thermidor and instead receiving a fish taco. I would like it on record that the actress playing Cancer is possibly the least effective actor to appear in Blake 7, let alone somebody who's meant to be the villain of an episode. Games is a personal favourite of mine. Avon has done a deal to steal this week's MacGuffin, Feldon, which for the purposes of this episode only is both the hardest known substance in the universe and also the most valuable, well, for this week. Their opponent is Belkov, who runs a Federation mining operation but has apparently been holding back on most of the powerful Feldon crystals.
Where?
Where what?
Where do we steal the Feldon crystals from?
Feldon crystals, full name Barbara Feldon crystals, can increase power output for, well, whatever you need, but only for this episode as they'll never be mentioned again. Belkov likes to play games with Gambit, his pretty schmick gaming PC, which gets over 1 billion frames per second on Solitaire, but thanks to GPU driver issues has frame pacing problems running Crisis. Belkov has also hidden his stash of Barbara Feldon crystals on his ship Orbiter, which is protected by games/booby traps. There's a House of the Dead style game, Microsoft Flight Simulator, a lock-picking minigame from Assassin's Creed, and what looks like a calculator, but it's one that you can't turn upside down to, well, you know.
Can you explain why your friend Avon has taken your ship out of orbit?
Games is a fun story with lots of twists and turns as everyone is out to betray each other, though the game side of thing looks more than a little quaint. Vila gets a chance to shine in this episode when he has to sweet-talk Belkov's jilted computer.
I'm programmed for all games.
Oh, that's very kind of you, madam, but not at the moment, thanks.
After quite a few variable episodes so far this season, it is nice to see the production team have caught up to where they needed to be. Almost there. Sand is a story where Scorpio races a Federation investigator to find out what happened to a doomed mission on a planet full of sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
I've seen that kind of stuff from dozens of people under torture.
Of course, you just happened to be passing the door when they said it.
It's called Vern, but it might as well be called Sandy Cracks. And then the planet starts killing people off one by one, leaving only Tarrant and Servalan on the planet.
I'm just the girl next door.
If you were the girl next door, I'd move.
Where would you move to, Tarrant?
Next door.
The two play word games like Have I Never, which turns into Wow, Have I Ever, and ends with Holy shit, did I just do Servalan? The Sand is pulling the same shtick on the Scorpio, draining Vila so Avon and the girls can start making baby psychopaths. Sand is an interesting story, not as outlandish as Tanith Lee's other story, and perhaps people wanting a preservative so badly seems a bit low stakes. The production can be hit and miss. The exterior of the planet has an aggressively artificial look. It does look like they borrowed a cyclorama from a Disney pantomime, but just maybe I'm being picky. Vampire Sand either works for you or it doesn't. Perhaps I'm so far removed from the shock of the new with Blake 7 that any old shit works for me. This is only one of 2 episodes to give us any backstory to Servalan, and the only one to explain what motivates her lust for power.
Power became my lover.
It's not the last episode with Servalan, but it is the last one to feature her in such a large role, and as such, Jackie Pearce does a great job here, pining over her well-preserved but really quite dead former lover. I can't imagine being in the studio with all that green sand was much of a pleasant experience for the cast and crew, but when it's not looking really fake, this is a story that is made by some of the best performances of the series as a whole. Gold is a fun heist story, not especially deep or complex, but it does feature a fun guest turn by comedy actor Roy Kinnear as the crew of the Scorpio conspire to steal some gold. It's a little sloppy in places, but on the whole a solid episode, with a very, very high body count. We are getting to the point where the ending of every episode ends up with the same downer each week in order to maintain the status quo. I'm not talking about getting an electricity bill on the same day you get paid, but whatever scheme Avon has this week, it'll end up being a wasted effort, like trying to teach a Labrador to paint ceilings. Also, on a side note, avoid good boy house painters. They are cheap, but the quality of their work is really marginal. Orbit is a small show to balance the budget, relying on snappy dialogue. Avon and Vila do a deal to swap Aurak for a powerful weapon invented by the mad recluse Igrorian. Everybody's double-crossing each other, which leads to Avon and Vila stuck in a shuttle that's going to crash if they can't lighten the load.
Damn it, what weighs 70 kilos?
Vila weighs 73 kilos, Avon.
Well, that took a turn. While Avon briefly hunting down Vila is character appropriate, there's something more than a little creepy about Darrow's performance throughout the whole episode. Avon might have a loyal crew, but really, as far as their well-being goes over his own, he gives no f***s.
You know you are safe with me.
Warlord is a very unusual episode. The story itself of Avon trying to build an anti-Federation coalition with non-aligned worlds, which then falls apart when the largest of their number, Zukan, sells them out to Servalan, is a solid story, but the production is a little controversial. It's some of the showiest of the series. I personally love it with its overly melodramatic flair, Federation troops doing somersaults, the over-the-top soapy scenes of Tarrant and his girlfriend Ziona, daughter of said traitor Zukan. Zukan is an incredibly intense character, and with some of the design choices, everything needs to be played straight.
Betafal affirms.
Xenon base is nearly destroyed and the survivors snipe at each other while they try to find a way out. Soolin has become a rounded character even without a spotlight episode. The characters trapped in Xenon base snap at each other in a fairly realistic manner, something that Blake 7 had sort of forgotten about for the first half of this season. Some folks hate this episode, or at least the production on this episode, but for the same reasons that I like it. Stylish excess. However, nothing on planet Earth will ever make me think Ziona's hair was not a bad mistake. Of course, this was 1981, and if Blake 7 had continued, it is likely that hairstyles would have gotten a lot more outlandish. Of course, all of this is leading up to something major. By this last season, Avon had become, let's face it, the absolute worst person to work with. A brilliant jerk, to be sure, that guy at work who knows everything about everything, has all the answers, but ask him to cover your shift and see where that gets you. This season alone, he used Dayna and Vila as decoys, ensured his own escape route was covered, would have left Tarrant to rot on sandy crack if he could have, and let's not forget, he was ready to eject Vila from an airlock without a word of protest.
Who else? After all, you always say you feel safe with me.
I did once work with a guy like Avon. I don't know what he's up to now. He's probably shilling reverse mortgages for your dog's kennel. Blake sees Avon and crew abandon Xenon base and move on to their next idea, another rebel leader who can inspire. Blake's alive and well, apart from his depth perception. He's working as a bounty hunter on the frontier planet Gouda Prime, Soolin's home planet. Scorpio is attacked as it approaches the planet and the crew abandon ship, leaving Tarrant the job of crash landing the ship. Poor Slave offers his last report.
Whose ship is this?
Why? You think you're making an offer for it?
When Blake sorts through the wreckage of Scorpio, which includes Tarrant, looking a bit wounded but more winded. The whole episode is based around misunderstandings and wrong assumptions, like the time I assumed the milkman was in fact stealing the empties. Blake is playing a dangerous game which turns out to be a test while recruiting for his latest army. The thing is, Tarrant does not get the memo, and things don't go so well when Blake and a totally paranoid Avon finally meet.
Avon, I was waiting for you!
Federation troops move in, killing the crew one by one, and then Avon is surrounded. Did they all die? Were they stunned? Was there a way out for the 5th season? There's just enough ambiguity that if they needed to, they could continue, but in any event, writer Chris Boucher was told to wrap it up. The end credits begin with no music, just some sound effects, which kind of imply that Avon lets loose several rounds, before the dozen or so Federation troops finally decide to shoot him. Of course, Avon lives on in every fanfiction interpretation. If they had wanted to make more, they could have found a way. However, Blake was really dead. The only thing deader than Blake was the 8-track. Gareth Thomas had stipulated that Blake's death had to have no ambiguity, hence the very large amount of blood. Servalan does not appear, which annoyed Jacqueline Pearce. Aurak had been hidden away somewhere, so it survived. And Blake's story of Jenna's demise as relayed to Tarrant may or may not have been accurate. It's quite weird to see Blake and replacement character Tarrant in a scene together, though they could at least share the same hairdresser. Blake is an absolutely fantastic 50 minutes of television, probably one of the best written, acted and produced pieces of British science fiction of the 20th century, easily up there with some of Doctor Who's top 5.
If you're here, and Aurak's here, how did Tarrant get off the ship?
Director Mary Ridge had come into Blake 7 helming the 3rd season finale where she oversaw the Liberator's destruction, and for her 5th episode of Blake 7 she got to wreck another ship, where she cheekily remounted this same shot for Scorpio's doom. This episode is almost perfect and displays so very little of the things that Blake 7 was often pinged for. If only there were more like this. I'm often a little down after watching this episode, but it is just so good. And that's where our second video at Blake 7 ends. If you haven't watched the first video, you really should. And if you've never seen the series yet somehow are still watching, go and watch it and get the DVD or BritBox it or whatever. Just watch it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos. Ah, fuck it.